Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Waypoint, Airmed&Rescue's new podcast. I'm your host, Oliver Cuenca. Joining me for this episode is Joe Slemko, RPAS Coordinator at Edmonton Police Service. So, just to introduce you, you are the Drone Program Coordinator for Edmonton Police Service. You've been an officer for 38 years, and you previously worked in crime scene investigation and collision reconstruction before you became who you are today. Firstly, I was just wondering if I could ask, how long have you been in your current role, and how did you end up getting to that position? Because to me, it seems like a bit of a jump from what you were doing previously, perhaps, to drones.
Well, essentially, as mentioned, I have a 38 career with the Edmonton Police Service, and through our career, we have limited tenure in areas of specialization. And as you mentioned, I have worked in crime scenes and then in major collision. The Edmonton Police Service has kind of had a drone program since 2016. But it primarily just started off with our tactical unit using small mini drones for building clearing, and then our major collision section for just doing overhead photography. When I went into the major collision section, of course, we would have collision scenes that we would have to hold traffic or block traffic. It could be up to 6 or 7 hours when we were doing all of our scene measurements for to do our reconstruction. So being that we did have drones, I thought that there must be a better way, and that's where we got into using drones for scene mapping, producing actual measurable diagrams or drawings through photographs with the use of the drone. So that's kind of where I first got started with drones. And so the service itself started to see the technology developing and the possibility of using drones in other capacities. And 3 years ago, they actually created a full-time position within our flight operations unit where we operate 2 helicopters and a plane, fixed-wing aircraft. And I work in the flight operations unit and now coordinate the program that we have. Our drone program now is expanded to over 100 drone operators and 30 different aircraft platforms throughout the police service. In addition to that, I also have a commercial fixed-wing manned aircraft license. And that aviation background that I have has benefited immensely because now I'm able to provide instruction in our ground schools, and we run our own internal program for instruction and obtaining the required licenses that are required here in Canada.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Did you have the pilot's license before you? When did you actually become affiliated with the flight ops unit? Was it around the same time you got started with the drones, or was there a bit where you were flying fixed wings before then?
Well, actually, I became affiliated with using drones probably about 10 years ago, 10 to 10 years ago. And then that kind of pushed my interest in aviation even farther. I mean, I've been interested in aviation since I flew radio controlled model aircraft when I was 12 years old. And it just kind of really sparked my interest in aviation to then pursue finally as a lifetime goal to get my private pilot license and then my commercial pilot license. So they kind of occurred both at the same time.
Yeah, so they just sort of feed in naturally into each other then, in a sense.
Yeah, and having that aviation knowledge has really benefited in helping develop the drone program because, of course, everything that we do with RPAS, remotely piloted aircraft systems or drones, is all mandated and regulated by Transport Canada. And there's fairly strict regulations. So being able to have an understanding that from the aviation perspective has really benefited the development of the drone program so that everything's consistent.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was thinking of touching on that in a bit. But firstly, would you mind giving us a rundown of the kind of drones that you're currently using in your unit?
Well, it's not really specifically the unit. We use drones now right across the police service from all sorts of different mission types. Our frontline patrol officers now are equipped with drones. So they will use them when they arrive first on scene, depending, for example, if it's a weapons complaint, they'll get the drone up as soon as possible to start gathering operational intelligence. For example, if we have a higher risk vehicle stop where, we believe that person has a weapon, well, immediately the patrol officers will deploy the drone to get the drone right up to the vehicle. So we're not, the biggest thing about drones for us in the police service is officer safety. It provides us on eyes and gives us distance to gather intelligence to be able to safely deal with the situation. So we have our frontline patrol officers. Of course, I mentioned our major collision, where we use it for scene mapping and photography. Our tactical unit consistently uses them for interior building clearing, where we'll put drones in with a video feed, and we're able to clear the entire building or see what the risks are inside the building. We have now started to use them in our surveillance units, being able to get eyes on. Again, we have to work in consistent with the privacy laws, but in public spaces and that where we're able to get eyes on somebody where normally we couldn't, we're using them. Probably one of the biggest areas that we're using them now is, of course, we have a homelessness problem here. We have a very large river valley that's very difficult. It's very dense. So now our park rangers are every day routinely flying sort of reconnaissance missions looking for homelessness camps and also fires. We're able to mitigate fires that are being set by these people to mitigate that risk. So it's a huge spectrum of different uses and applications that we use them for. As far as the drones, we use everything. Primarily, we're using DJI drones right now, just because they're a very cost-effective, technology-forward type of drone. And essentially, everything from the Avata to the Mini 3-4s to the Mavic 3s, all the way up to the Matrice 300. When we get into the Matrice 300, now we're using that for Overwatch for major events, festivals, those types of things, or we'll have it tethered with a video downlink into our command center. So again, just a multitude of different mission applications that we're using them for.
So obviously, that's a broad range of operations that you're using them for. So how do drones really fit into EPS's sort of wider aviation operations? Because the thing that sort of strikes me is a lot of the stuff that I guess they're being used for would previously be done by crewed aircraft. And is there still a place for planes and helicopters?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, we work together as a team. There'll be instances where we have a drone first on scene. Of course, a drone that we use now are limited by battery life. So if they're first on scene, that gives the opportunity for the drone operator to get eyes on something until the helicopter could arrive, or till the aircraft, the fixed wing aircraft, gets in place. One of the biggest things that fixed or manned aircraft can do is managing vehicle pursuits that a drone can't. Again, because you're limited by the battery life. And one of the biggest things in Canada is we always have to fly a drone within visual line of sight. So we're kind of limited as far as how we apply that drone. Transport Canada, that regulates these things, is starting to loosen that up a bit. But there's a huge process that you have to go through to get the special operating certificates to operate a drone beyond visual line of sight, especially if you're looking at an urban area. So yeah, and personally, and even manned search operations. If anybody's ever flown a drone and tried to search a large area, staring at the video screen on a controller, it's very difficult to do, as opposed to somebody in a manned aircraft that can use the naked eye to complete a scan and then see something and then focus in with whatever camera equipment that you have. So like you say, that it's a huge benefit after being in both platforms, that you realize that manned aircraft still have significant value for various applications.
Okay, that makes sense. Obviously, you touched on the regulation thing. Do you think, obviously, it's not just the case in Canada, there's also stuff like the agencies such as the FAA, the CAA, etc. There's all these different agencies that have very similar rules about beyond visual line of sight. Do you think perhaps it's limiting the potential development in some ways? I know you say that Transport Canada is now moving forward a bit, but is it still too cautious?
No, I think it's valid caution, because as soon as you start to go beyond visual line of sight, then there's the risk is much higher with the drone for conflicts with other aircraft. So I think it's moving at a good pace until the technologies are proven to ensure that all our airspace is safe and that there's no conflict in that regard.
Okay, and of course there is a certain degree of concern about things like privacy, for example. Do you are drones more invasive than traditional aircraft? Because obviously, like from my perspective, it just seems like it's perhaps a more lightweight way of doing similar things. But then I suppose you've mentioned that some of them fly into buildings and things.
I think, yeah, yes, drones can be definitely a little more invasive as far as privacy, because you can get a drone right up to a window to look inside, whereas a manned aircraft, you're not able to do that. So, depending on how it's applied, yes, it can be a little more invasive. But that being said, the technology that we have with our high resolution cameras that we have on our manned aircraft platforms, the resolution and the zoom that they have, the reach that they have, really is changing aviation in law enforcement. So there's going to be a lot of growing pains with us in Canada. Of course, we rely on the courts through case law to give us the limits and how we use these technologies. And we're just starting out with drones, and it's going to be potentially a painful process to get through. But none of that case law exists to really give us the legal parameters that we have to use to work with drones. So it'll take years, I think, for that to develop.
Okay, you've made it clear that you sort of think of drones as being just one part of the overall aviation capabilities that police have. Is there a danger though that say less understanding people, say in governments, people who control the funding perhaps, don't quite understand that drones can't do everything, and they might try to, I guess, cost cut traditional police aviation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Without having a intimate knowledge of all the various aviation platforms, upper managers they just look at dollars and cents. Really, it's all about cost effectiveness, and so yeah, money's a huge decision maker for any agency. And yeah, that's definitely a problem. Going down the road is a multi-million-dollar a helicopter versus a drone that's $30,000 that seemingly can do the same things. So
Mm.
that's, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Do you think police need to make sure that they're communicating that to local governments?
Oh, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to money.
Mm.
And it depends on the agency. A lot of smaller agencies now that can't afford a conventional helicopter or fixed wing aircraft can now afford a drone program. So uh, it's a luxury to have both platforms. Um, but I mean, some agencies can't afford that, so it's all about money.
So, going in a slightly different direction, of course, you obviously do a lot of training, teaching people how to operate these aircraft. Is there a difference in how you would train, say, an RPAS pilot versus those flying a traditional aircraft? You touched on stuff like they're viewing through a screen, for example, as opposed to direct line of sight.
Well, yeah, there's a huge difference, and it mostly is just time to get a conventional aviation license as opposed to an RPAS license that essentially you can get in a week, really, with a ground school and doing the exams and doing the practical test, and really you can't compare the two. I mean, we kind of have a running joke within our manned aviation that, you can't call yourself a pilot, because you have to become a real pilot. You're just an RPAS operator, so there's always that sort of running joke and a little bit of a conflict. So yeah, there's a huge difference. It's a little different in aviation when potentially your life's at risk when you're operating a manned aircraft as opposed to being an RPAS operator on the ground, essentially operating a model aircraft. So the standards are much different.
I imagine it's a very different experience, though. In some ways, it could be potentially a bigger responsibility to some extent. The fact that you can sort of be invisible as a drone pilot when around other aircraft, but then I suppose that's where the regulations come in, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where the regulations come in. But again, regulations only work for people that want to follow them. And that's another major area for us is illegal drone operations, the general public operating drones and not having the appropriate licenses, not following the appropriate regulations. And unfortunately, that also falls under my portfolio, is looking after counter drone measures, and also like major events now, stadium events, where we had a major hockey game here at an open air stadium where we had over the course, we had 6 illegal drones flown into the stadium from remote locations. And, it's only a matter of time before people with bad intentions start using them to, potentially terrorize those types of events.
Do you think that's likely to be a growing risk then?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And unfortunately, the technology to defeat those things is incredibly expensive. And really not within the scope of most law enforcement agencies, because you're looking at potentially $500,000 to to have the appropriate systems to prevent against that. So that's a huge area of concern, especially for law enforcement to start being able to manage these things.
Yeah. Well, from that note, let's end on a slightly more positive one, I guess. So what do you see as being the big future steps for police drone operation that you see coming down the pipeline?
Well, for us is the development of real-time intelligence, meaning the drone operator has a live video feed going to the commanders, so that they can see with their own eyes in real time events unfolding, so they can sort of assign appropriate resources, manage resources, and mitigate risk. We've never had that in conventional law enforcement. Everything was transmitted by a radio, where somebody's observing it. They then have to interpret that and then relay that by a radio. There could be misinterpretation or misinformation. But the biggest thing for us in law enforcement is having that real eye on a situation where the event commanders and decision makers can make the appropriate decisions on real information. And that's huge for law enforcement to appropriately react.
Yeah. Anyway, that's everything. But just to say again, thank you very much for spending this time talking to us about what you do. It all sounds really, well, quite exciting, really, I think.
Okay, well, I appreciate and nice chatting with you.
Brilliant. And I hope you have a good morning. What time is it then, actually?
9:30 in the morning. So just
9:30. Well, you got a whole day ahead of you.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode of Waypoint, the Airmen and Rescue podcast. Thank you again to Joe Slemko of Edmonton Police for joining us. Don't forget to keep up with all our upcoming episodes via your favourite platform. We'll see you soon.